Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest in the series of INFUSE webinars hosted by Send. This month, we are going to be looking at the subject of managing change. We've got a very good panel to cover that subject. We've got 30 minutes or so in which we're going to be looking at some of the issues associated with transformation and change and how that's done well and some of the challenges that we've got associated with it. We're going to be looking at how possibly reframing transformation, shifting the mindset from the idea of transformation to maybe modernisation, whether that can help make it more achievable and less disruptive. We're going to be looking at reasonable change management and practical approaches to embedding some new technologies and processes without overwhelming the business. We're also going to be looking at the people aspect of it, how successful change management relies on early engagement, making sure that people feel heard, valued and invested in when the program drives for adoption and lasting impact. So what I'm going to do is start off by introducing our panel. We have Matt Carter, Emma Cullen and Ryan Deeds, and I'm going to ask them all to come on to the stage and give them a short introduction to their background. Matt, if I could start with you.
Sure. Good afternoon. Good morning. So, yeah, Matt Carter. I am the practice director at Altus Consulting. We're a management consultancy focused in the financial services, and I lead their practice into the specialty and London markets. And as of last week, we're acquired by Accenture. So they acquired us for our deep industry experience and the way we engineer and model change. But my experience is 30 years in the London Lloyd's market, broker, underwriter, but more latterly acting as that connector between the business and technology, sort of speaking both languages. So now I see myself as an agent of change, helping good people do good things.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Emma, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Or you're on mute, I think.
There had to be one, didn't there? It was going to be me. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Emma Cullen. I am the head of operational strategy, change and excellence for QBE. My background's been pretty varied. So I've spent most of it in underwriting. I've done portfolio. I've been a broker. I've worked for MGAs. I've worked for insurers. I have done change off the side of my desk. I've done bigger sort of more global transformation programs. So my experience is quite varied. I've had change done to me. I've also been the person to do change to other people. So hopefully I'll be able to bring a sort of broad perspective to today's discussion. Excellent.
Thank you. And last but not least, Ryan.
I'm Ryan Deeds. I'm the analytics leader at Alchemy. I've spent the vast majority of my career inside insurance agencies between 10 million revenue, 50 million in revenue. Helped at Assurex for 3 years, and then I was at an insurtech startup before I came over to Alchemy. And so throughout my journey, I've been trying to navigate change within the broker space and for all different sizes. So glad to be here this morning.
Excellent, thank you. And I think we've got quite a wide geographic and experiential spread here. We've got insurers, we've got brokers, we've got MGAs, we've got insurtechs, consulting, we've got the US, we've got Europe. I think we've probably got all bases covered here. So let's dive into our subject. I'd like to start with just a simple question about what are the essential ingredients for a successful change program. Ryan, outline what you see for that.
And I think the number one challenge most folks have is not being able to plan effectively. Like, hey, if we put a change in and we bring it in, what does that result look like? What does success look like? What does failure look like? They get very enamored with a technology or a tool, and they don't think about the at the desk pain and who they're solving that for and how it's going to be used. How do they communicate that effectively? And sometimes they even hurt themselves. They think they're innovative because they're bringing in a lot of product, but they're also rolling out a lot of products. So they kind of diminish their ability to be innovative. And so it's kind of the key thing that I've seen throughout my journey.
So making sure it's well planned out and the people aspect of it is well engaged. Matt, Emma, what's your views on essential ingredients for a successful program?
I think picking up on Ryan, he's right that outcomes are critical. So being very clear about the outcomes you're expected, that often starts with really understanding where you've come from So, being very clear about that. But I think in my experience as well, one of the key elements is as you go through any change program, and these can be quite lengthy, is the need to sort of have some sort of abstracted view of the prize that you're going after, because as programs of all sorts of change evolve, they can become quite detailed quite quickly, and sometimes the group, the collective, can lose sight on the bigger picture, and reminding people about where we're heading and why we're heading there, and just bringing them back to a sort of a common middle is very useful.
Yeah, my experience has always been you've got to have that banner up at the front. It's the economy stupid, or whatever it might be when you're trying to get elected or you're trying to do a change program, something that people can rally behind and remember as they're going through the hard times, that's what they're trying to achieve. Emma, what are your thoughts on that?
I think maybe not selling an unrealistic dream. I think a lot of the time when you see comms, especially when they're comms out to the people who are likely to be using the tool, it might have been a problem that's been in a business for quite a while. And quite often when the comms come out, it's going to be, hey, this is going to, revolutionize your world. And the reality is with technology is it rarely lands, and it's perfect. So I think kind of preparing people to be able to say, look, we want your feedback. It's an iterative process, and bringing them on that journey and allowing them in, I think, is really important if you want to deliver something successfully, because you need that feedback. There's only so much you can do in a test environment. That would probably be my.
It's kind of an interesting challenge, right, Tony? Because you want to keep this high level vision of the dream, but to the user, you want to keep it scaled down and approachable. And I think the iterative nature, making sure they understand that. So I think it's a hard thing to kind of balance out. How do you do that the most effectively?
Yeah, I've got to say, I'll put my hand up and say that 35 years or so in the insurance technology world, technology companies are renowned for over-promising on the things that they can deliver. Keeping it real and specific to the business that they're working with, and very much achievable from a business perspective, I think is probably a key part of the starting point. Otherwise, over-promising and then under-delivering because it's not feasible is always going to lead to difficulties. And then you have the problems of people then remembering that the next time round. Part of I suppose you have to be very clear on what you're doing and making sure that it's really achievable. So in practical terms, then, so what are the biggest challenges which prevent success? And we talked about the idea of reframing transformation into modernisation. Is that helpful? Emma, what do you think?
So I think probably when you think about barriers, especially in insurance, it's quite easy to probably kind of end up in the legacy systems, regulatory framework, data. They're all challenges that we all face. But I think if I think about my experience in the industry, probably the things that I've seen have become the biggest barriers are more human-centric. They're more things like finding commonality of language. So, if you think about underwriters, these are people who have grown up in an industry where they are very, very good at dealing with very complicated problems and using very complicated solutions to solve those problems. You've got people in IT who have to keep a view on the entire landscape of technology that's available. And most of those things can be configured to a certain degree to be able to tailor them. And then you've got change people who are really skilled in solving in simplicity, but don't necessarily understand the complexity. And so finding a way to bring all of those people together and speak a common language that everybody understands, I think sometimes can be a real barrier. I think it's why we sometimes end up with over-engineered systems, or solutions that maybe don't meet our end user, because we're not very good at how we translate that message from the guys on the shop floor who are experiencing the pain to the people who are looking for that solution. So I think probably sort of that commonality of language, I think, is important. But I'd also probably pick up on sort of clarity of purpose as well, right? Like, I think whenever you look at what are you solving for, starting with sort of problem first, what's the outcome? And I think if you talk to your stakeholders a lot of the time and you say, what is it that you want? Do you want it to be fast? Do you want it to be super innovative? Do you want it to be the cheapest? Whatever it is, they'll kind of tell you they want all of those things. Yes. And I think sometimes the challenge is kind of reining back to being like, okay, let's maybe pick one or two that we can deliver really, really well. I think sometimes when you try to do everything, you end up by its very nature kind of creating something that doesn't really hit the mark.
So do you think that's sort of naivety in the business community or higher overextended expectations? Why don't if they say I want all of it now and I want it, or I want it 5 minutes ago? Is it just they don't understand, or is it they're just pushing harder to get the business results?
I think it's probably a combination of things, right? And one of the other things I guess that I've observed, Tony, is probably our ability to accept that we don't always know the answer, and to be resilient, to be comfortable in being uncomfortable. By its very nature in insurance, we're not good at that, right? Like, we've built an entire industry of taking things that we don't really, we're not sure about, and moving them to as quickly as possible, getting them to something that we're sure about. That's kind of the nature our industry's been built on, and that's been super helpful in that industry. But I think when you start to move into technology, actually being comfortable being uncomfortable, not jumping straight into solution, really understanding the problem that you're solving for, putting your customer at the heart of that takes discipline, and it goes against probably our nature too, right? I think a lot of us want to be able to be seen, to be able to know what the answer is. And so I think sometimes it's just, how do you stay in that uncomfortableness and be okay with it? And I think sometimes it is just that desire to want to solve, and then there are multiple problems as well, right? A lot of the time we're dealing with multiple things.
So Matt, I mean, do you see that with your clients? They expect consultants to have all the answers, don't they?
Yeah, I was going to say, thanks, Tony. That's going to be my first point, is that actually, as consultants, we have to pull ourselves back from being in solution mode very too quickly, and you're quite right. So we do have to listen and understand the problem. I mean, whether it's about transformation, really significant change, or whether it's about modernizing and being better, fundamentally the success really comes from absolutely understanding where you are. So and you cannot change anything that if you don't fully understand it, is the reality, and that can come from a bunch of different ways. But the purpose and the point around transformation and modernization for me and for us as we're going as consultants is transformation is often perceived to be a once done end activity, big, hairy, quite challenging, but somehow there's some euphoric moment at the end. The interesting thing I think about the reframing to modernization is it plays a little bit more to the continuous improvement, get better. It's the elephant sandwich analogy, or however you want to look at it. It's just doing little bits, and ultimately through lots of little bits you'll get significant change at the end of it, but doing it in a more managed way. So it's that continuous improvement of change is more palatable. That doesn't detract from some organizations do need to transform, but I think most we actually speak to, work with, they need to modernize what they've got, and that can be done in a number of ways.
Okay, and Ryan, what are you seeing in the North American market? Similar kind of story?
I mean, I truly believe that the largest resistance to change that I've seen is the lack of our ability to determine the value for the individual that has to be changed, because they have such fear in them. This is taking my value proposition. I mean, I saw it when we brought in certificate automation systems. The value proposition for an account manager at that point in time was certificate delivery. Well, if the agency or corporation doesn't help that user understand where their value goes to from there, you have this massive emotional resistance to change, because you feel like you're outmoding yourself. So I think if we're more clear about what happens, how your value changes with this change. And then I do think that having massive alignment with that problem, because I think when you bring in tools that don't solve problems from a CEO level down to the desk, what you build is hypocrisy. They're like, they don't understand me, and it builds another resistance. So now you have two of these emotional resistances, which are harder to get through than almost anything else from my experience.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the human elements of change and getting the clear messaging, the engagement, and whatever. These days, technologies are going to always be a key ingredient in any transformation program. How does it affect how you manage change? Matt, what do you think about
that? As you say, so the reality is that every change in an organization probably has a destination of some form of technology. But I don't think, as speaking as a consultant and as as a agent of change. I think we're too much of an outlier, but maybe we are, in that we obsess over the business challenge first. It's to understand the business challenge, understand the impact of the people, as we've mentioned before, and then ultimately look at the technology solutions that exist. And in 2025 and in the last 5 years, technology has not been the barrier at all. There's an abundance of good technology out there to be deployed. It's about deploying it in the right way, for the right reasons, to deliver the right outcomes, and doing it in a controlled way. We use in other organizations, we look at maturity levels as well, about how to help people along a change. And the interesting thing about a maturity level of an organization is to accept that you don't have to be great at everything. Sometimes in certain parts of your business, good enough is good enough. And it's understanding that differentiator as to where then technology can come in and give you that real edge, rather than thinking you have to give yourself an edge everywhere, because it's not required. And the final bit about where you manage change with the use of technologies, it's rare that any element of technology is an island. In today's world, and as it should be, it's very a connected organization. And so one of the challenges we do see as well, having to rein clients back from, is this feeling that a piece of technology is the silver bullet. The reality is it only works when it's properly connected with your existing estate, or a new estate, or a new attribute or platform or solution that exists. And it's when you get these things working in harmony, that's when change can start to really be delivered. So, technology is important to always consider it, but it needs to be considered in a wide sense. And effectively, it's back to making sure that you obsess over the business challenge, because then you'll know that you're going to get the right technology to match up.
Right. So, Emma, are you seeing the same thing internally at QBE? Is it do you manage a change program that's technology based versus one that's not in the same way?
So, I have an operational excellence team that sit underneath me. So, probably a lot of the time, and I think this is probably true for a lot of insurers, actually technology is the answer in a number of cases. Sometimes, though, that might just be utilization of existing technology. Quite often, you think about your own mobile phone, how much of the functionality that's on that phone do you really connect with? Do you really know how to use? So sometimes you have the estate, but maybe people aren't connecting to it or using it in the way that you expect them to. So actually some of it, when you start to explore these problems, it's not that you necessarily need a new piece of technology. Some of it as well, it might be that, you're not ready to make that commitment or that decision yet. There are so many different tools out there. And I think that everything is evolving at such pace. What our customers need and want today is going to be different tomorrow. There are new providers. So again, it's quite difficult, I think, sometimes to, especially with the way that things work, it takes a long time to get technology out and deployed. I think one of the challenges is sometimes that we want to get to that perfect end solution quite quickly, and actually what we need is a much more iterative process whereby we can test and learn and experiment more. And I think probably a lot of businesses are maybe just not set up yet to do that well. Not in the insurance anyway. I'm not saying that for everybody. We're definitely getting better at it, but I think that is a challenge.
Certainly, that's been my experience. So Ryan, you've been on both sides. You've been on the technology side, you've been on the internal change side. Do you think that there's a sort of a gap between the technology providers who come in and say, right, I will deliver the project, which is to deliver my technology, but not necessarily taking it all the way through to, and will deliver the benefits that are associated with that?
That I think is the key, right? Like, because that to me is the problem. Is how many times have you bought a solution with an end result in mind, and that never materialized because it was the technology that we were focused on at 100% adoption. And so, but I do think fundamentally in the next 2 years, the way that technology is procured, leveraged, built changes drastically. So I think, agent companies, today you go out and buy big box software and all this stuff. I see a future where that doesn't really occur, where maybe you have something that you say, hey, build this thing, and it automatically gets created for the user, customized to that user. The stuff that is coming out so quickly right now, and I think that's why this panel is so important, is kind of understand that whole dynamic of how we used to purchase technology, how we do it today, and how we're going to do it in the future, and how that impacts and what the advantages are.
Okay. Well, look, you're all seasoned professionals in transformation, obviously in different areas of insurance. Do you have examples where you've learned valuable lessons during your change journey, which essentially our audience could benefit from and learn from, that you could share with them? Emma, do you have any examples?
Yeah, I do. I've probably got a particularly vulnerable example here I'm going to share. So I was working on a project which was looking at the usability of a particular platform, and it was looking at how do we make the user experience both for customers and for underwriters better. And this was a project that took quite a long time. There was a huge amount of time spent, going back and forth, talking to people, prototyping, testing, really thinking, in terms of what we were producing. And, it was one of those projects, I'm sure there's people on this panel today that can relate to this, where you were up late, it was weekends, it was, all encompassing. And we finally got it over the line. And I was so excited because I thought, this is really cool. We've done some really cool things. And I bounced down the office expecting a standing ovation and a round of applause, for how brilliant this thing was. And I stopped off and I was having a chat with one of the underwriters and I said, hey, how are you finding it? And they said, I don't like it. And I said, what? What do you mean you don't like it? And actually, the realization for me was actually they talked about the fact that they were dyslexic. And they talked about the fact that actually for them, when they were looking at this screen, the fact that we had broadened something out and we had, instead of having it in sort of panels of information, it was reading across the screen. What they actually said was, I'm really struggling to read that. And it stopped me in my tracks. And it really made me think, 1 in 5 people have neurodiversity. And actually, it was not something that had really probably entered my thought process through all of the work that we'd done. As I said, it felt like we'd done quite a good job. And it was a real learning for me that no matter how well you think you probably know your customers, actually, you can still find these things. And as I said, the neurodiverse angle was massive for me because I thought, actually, this is probably a really underrepresented group. And when people are thinking about, how we make more efficiency, this is 20% of our workforce, it's 20% of our customer base, all that have this challenge. How have we missed it? So I don't know what the lesson for me was, actually, you maybe sort of think about the diversity in terms of the people that you bring in on these projects, but also actually there's a massive opportunity there.
And socializing it well in advance, I guess, so that they have that opportunity to input those sorts of things at an early stage. Yeah, no, that's a great lesson. Matt, you've obviously had lots of clients that you've been working with over the years. You must have some examples.
No, of course, Tony. It's a constant learning curve. Every organization is similar and then slightly different. But I think one of the things that this was going back earlier. So obviously, getting technology changing adopted and embedded into an organization, you have to go through a series of discoveries and gathering some requirements principally. And so you have to have an element of communication and be a pragmatist and sometimes a pacifier. But one thing that I learned relatively early on was I was looking at trying to understand for system design just the cancellation process in insurance, which, as we all know, it should be one way, but is many ways. But the reality was I was talking to an agency and an executive, and we said, we just wanted to come, thank you for giving us some time of your business. We're just going to come in and talk to them about how they do cancellations. And the executive said, they do it this way. And he spelled out how it went. So, okay, thanks very much. We're going to go off. So I went and spoke to team A. Not surprisingly, they did it a different way. And then went and spoke to team C, and they did it a different way. So even within the one organization, there were 3 approaches. 2 were used. 1 was thought was being used. The lesson for all of that was that actually, to get technology more often adopted, you cannot please everybody. It's impossible. So you have to then shift it to about outcomes. So the process, because ultimately the outcome was very similar, if not the same. So the lesson is that you focus on outcomes and the process will somewhat take care of itself if it makes sense. But that said, you still need, you can't please everybody, but you do need to please some people. And you also need to get some evangelists on the way to help you, go through the journey where muscle memory is going to have to change. And that can be quite an obstacle as well. So it's you can't please everybody. You got to please some people, but if you can find a middle ground and focus on outcomes, that will really help you get your adoption moving.
Okay, no, that's great. Great advice. Ryan, you've seen it from so many different angles. You must have some great lessons learned.
So I think that the biggest lesson that I learned was, in the agency space, I just see us buy a bunch of technology, and it oftentimes I couldn't determine like why we were doing that and what it was aligned to. So at a couple of the agencies that I've worked at, we created a soul-sucking task list that went out to all the employees. They put down the 5 kind of things they hated to do. When we'd bring in a technological solution, it had to solve kind of one of the topmost problems that had the widest dispersion across. Then we get automatic buy-in. So I think, if there's ways that you can understand, and even if the solution doesn't specifically address that problem, if you can tie in that problem to the solution coming in, it helps everybody get buy-in. And I think buy-in is kind of such a huge component. But a soul-sucking task, it's a Google form. It's super easy to use. If you did it in your shop today, you'd be very surprised, I think, about what you got out of that.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Well, look, okay, we've got just a few minutes left. What I'd like to do at the end of our monthly seminars is just ask our panel to, if they spoke to somebody who was watching in the audience today, and I saw them in a couple of weeks' time, and they said, "Oh, I saw you on the webinar. I thought what you were saying was great." And you said, "Well, what's the most important thing that you remember from our webinar?" My question to you is, what would that be? What's the nugget of wisdom that you'd like them to take away in their minds? Matt, maybe I could start with you. What's the one big thing?
So I think whether it be, you cannot successfully change, modernize, transform something that you don't first really understand. You need to understand where you're coming from. At Altus, we use a lot of reference models. We use architecture's principles, and we really help trying to visualize change to illustrate the journey you're going on. But whatever it works for your business, make sure you document where you're coming from, because this will really help you highlight where you are going and where whatever it is you're looking at, the technology, the operating model, the people changes will impact. So it's understand where you're coming from will help you really drive to where you want to get to.
Excellent. Yeah, if you don't know where you are, how are you ever going to get to where you want to be? Great point. Yep. Ryan, your thoughts?
I mean, for me, it would make my little heart sing if they said, "Hey, we've diminished fear in our organization and we've got better outcomes now." I mean, because I do think that mechanism, having that be the goal, how do we diminish fear of failure, fear of, in insurance, you've got E&O, you've got all kinds of different problems that are out there. Can we accept a little of that? Can we be more supportive of our folks? I think that will bridge the gap for innovation.
Excellent. Okay, and Emma, can I leave the last words with you? What words of wisdom do you have for our audience?
I think it would be just, we talked about earlier, I think it's that resilience, right? Get comfortable being uncomfortable. I read a stat that said a 10-year-old today, by the time they're 60, will experience a year of change in just 11 days. There is no way that you can possibly know what the answers are on your own. So I think, the bit where you said, open yourself up, don't rush to find that solution, bring others into that conversation, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it is only going to get quicker. The pace of change is pretty relentless right now. So I think that would be my words of advice.
I mean, I think that's a great mantra. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think if more organizations acted that way, then we'd have a lot more success in some of the transformation programs that we see in the industry. Well, look, I think we're just about out of time. It just remains for me to say to our audience, thank you very much for attending today. I hope that you've enjoyed it and learned something. Actually, there are a lot of really good points in here, and it may be even worth going back and listening to this in retrospect again. Because there's so much good stuff in there. Next month, we're returning on the 9th of April to look at our next webinar, which is 2025, the year AI goes mainstream. So feel free to join us next month for our next webinar. Just really remains with me to say to everybody, thank you very much on our panel. You've been excellent covering our subject, and thank you very much for your insights. Much appreciated. So to everybody else, thank you very much. And goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.